Here we are again, folks. Brother Peter with tidbits from the Word. So proud to be with you today. We are in John, chapter 9. In the book of John, I'm doing a series, and we're going through it book by book, verse by verse, slowly. And as we do this, we're looking at those things that Jesus did. And in chapter 9 it said, "And as Jesus passed by, he saw a man which was blind from his birth." He didn't have to ask anybody that. He didn't have to say, "Has this man been blind from his birth?" or anything, because he knew that. Jesus knew everything. And he knew that that man had been blind from his birth. And so when he saw him, he knew that. And as he was walking by him, and his disciples asked him, saying, "Master, who did sin, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" And Jesus answered this question, and he said, Christ is the confronted with a man which was blind from his birth. The disciples immediately raised a theological question. This was a theological question they asked. We have to be careful that we don't theorize everything, because everything is not theological in the big sense of the word. And his blindness, the result of the man's sin or his parents. And a common belief among the Jews was that physical sickness was directly related to sin. Exodus 20 and 5 gives us that thought. And Christ is looking at the future, not the past. And he said the blindness gave opportunity for God's power to be manifest. So most work the workers. He said, we must work the work of the workers. And the disciples had asked the question, why? But Jesus was interested in not just the why. He was interested in that. He said, I must work the work of him that sent me while it is day. The night cometh when no man can work. So, this is, he said, what? What could be done for the man's need? The statement is a promise for the action that is above. It's about to follow. There's no explanation is given as why Christ chose this method in healing the blind man. He was probably testing the blind man's faith and obedience. Christ sent him to Siloam and told him to wash. And this story is similar of Nahum. However, the blind man responded immediately and was healed. So, verse 5, as long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world, Jesus says. And when he had thus spoken, he spat on the ground, made clay of the spittle, and anointed the eyes of the blind man with the clay, and said unto him, Go wash in the pool of Siloam, which is by the interpretation sent. He went his way, therefore, and washed, and came seeing. The neighbors, therefore, and they which before had seen him, that he was blind, said, Is not this he that sat and begged? Some said, This is he. Others said, He is like him. But he said, I am he. Therefore said they unto him, How were thine eyes opened? And he answered and said, A man that is called Jesus made clay and anointed mine eyes, and said unto me, Go to the pool of Siloam and wash. And I went and washed. Now he did what he was told, And there is a confession over the man's identity, over the man's identity. The miracle had changed the man's appearance. Finally, the man said, I am he. Probably 2 or 3 things changed his appearance. One thing is, he now could see. Another thing is, he washed. He probably wasn't very clean. He probably was dirty and dingy and rough looking. I suspect when he went to the pool to wash, he jumped right in the pool. And probably came out clean looking. And he had a different appearance. Now, not only did he have a different appearance that he could see, but he could see spiritually as well as physically. Because the man had been healed on the Sabbath, the neighbors took him to the Pharisees to make clay on the Sabbath was illegal. Jesus made the clay and put it on his eyes, and to make clay on the Sabbath was illegal because it was at work. It was considered work. Again, the second time he was asked to tell his story of healing. Let's go on to verse 13. They brought to the Pharisees him that aftertime was blind. And it was on the Sabbath day when Jesus made the clay and opened his eyes. Then again the Pharisees also asked him how he had received his sight. He said unto them, He put clay upon my eyes, and I washed, and do see. Therefore said some of the Pharisees, This man is not of God, because he keepeth not the Sabbath day. Others said, How can a man that is a sinner do such miracles? And there was a division among them. 16 and 17, the narration of that is Pharisees. Whenever you see the Pharisees, they don't see fair at all. They're Pharisees. And Christ had broken the Sabbath. Since Christ had broken the Sabbath, he could not be of God. Others argue that it was impossible for a sinner to perform miracles. Since Christ did perform a miracle, maybe he was not a sinner. But there was a division among them. They asked the man his opinion of Christ. He responded, He is a prophet, is what he says. Verse 18, But the Jews did not believe concerning him that he had been blind and received his sight, until they called the parents of him that had received his sight. Now this is something, isn't it? In verse 19, And they asked him, saying, Is this your son, who ye say was born blind? How then doth he now see? Verse 20, His parents answered them and said, We know that he was and is our son, and that he was born blind. But by what means he now seeth we know not, or who hath opened his eyes we know not. He is of age, ask him. He shall speak for himself. I like that. As his parents, they confirm that's his son, and he was born blind. However, they did not explain what had happened. They said, man, he's of age, just ask him. He's a grown man. 22. These words spake his parents because they feared the Jews, for the Jews had agreed already that if any man did confess that he was Christ, he should be put out of the synagogue. Therefore said his parents, He is of age, ask him. Verse 24. Then again called they the man who was blind, and said unto him, Give God the praise. We know that this man is a sinner. Wow. Verse 22 and 23, because they were afraid of the Jews, they wanted their son to speak for himself. The Jews had agreed that anyone who would recognize Christ as the Messiah would be excommunicated from the synagogue. Verse 24, they recalled the blind man, Give God the praise. They want the blind man to attribute the miracle to God alone, and to omit that Christ is a sinner. Admit that Christ is a sinner, rather than being objective. The Jews had already made up their mind about Christ. They'd already made up their mind that he was a sinner because he made clay on the Sabbath day. No, he said, I know not, and I know the Jews, we know he is a sinner. But the man says, I know not if he is a sinner. He answered and said whether he be a sinner or not. I know not. I don't know whether he's a sinner or not. All I know is to heal my eyes. And I guess his thinking was, who cares if it's a Sabbath day or not? The law is a killer. The Bible said the law killeth, but grace bringeth forth much good. Things I know, that whereas I was blind, and now I see. But I know whereas I was blind, and now I see. The receiving of sight is a fact, not an opinion. 26 and 27, then said they to him again, what did he to thee? Now opened he thine eyes. You know something? You know what's the funniest thing? Jesus spit on a little ball of dust in his hand and rolled it up and made a little clay and did his eyes. And they considered that work. And they're working in a fever to try to prove that he worked on the Sabbath, and it's the Sabbath and they're doing work. They're working hard to prove that he worked on the Sabbath so they could blame him and cast him out. Then said they to him again, what did he to thee? How openeth he thine eyes? And he answered them, I have told you already, and ye did not hear. Wherefore would you hear it again? Will you also be his disciples? Then they reviled him and said, thou art his disciple, but we are Moses' disciples. Wow. Look at this. Again the Jews asked him. Happened and how it happened. And the man became impatient with their repeated question. Will you also be his disciples? If I repeat it again, will you become Christ's disciples? Wow, 28 and 29, look at this. Then they reviled him and said, thou art his disciple? But we are Moses' disciples. We know that God spake unto Moses, as for this fellow, we know not from whence he is. The man answered and said unto them, why herein is a marvelous thing, that ye know not from whence it is, and yet he hath opened mine eyes. Now we know that God heareth not sinners, but if any man be a worshipper of God, and doeth his will, him he heareth. Since the world began, was it not heard of any man opening the eyes of one who was born blind? Wow. And look at this. The blind man now rubs salt in the wound. It is astonishing. He argues that the religious leader did not know where Christ came from when he had performed such an outstanding miracle. How could these leaders be knowledgeable and yet not something so important, not know something so important? The blind man continued in his argument as follows. God only listens to those who do his will, and not to sinners. This man performed a miracle that no one else had ever done, and God helped him do it. Therefore, Christ is not a sinner, for if he were, he could not do nothing. Or he could do nothing. Verse 34. They answered and said unto him, Thou wast altogether born in sin, and dost thou teach us? And they cast him out. Golly. Hey, the guy was blind in his eyes, and the Pharisees are totally blind spiritually. They are totally blind spiritually. I got news for you. We got the same exact thing in our churches today. The very, very, very same exact thing in our churches today. We have groups of men that believe that they are the hierarchy of the church. Whether they even know God or not is the big question. The question that a drunk off the street asked Jesus to forgive him of his sin, come into his heart, and save his soul is not a question. It's an answer. Yes, he did. He was blinded by the world. He was a drunk, a thief, a murderer. Everything under the sun, I was. And I asked Jesus, forgive me of my sin, come into my heart. I walk into a church. I go down and get baptized. And people say, I know that guy. I don't believe for a minute he's changed. We'll see. Let's watch him. We'll see if he is or not. Just because this guy had never been a drunk, had never been in sin, had never been that way before, he doesn't believe that this other man like myself really got saved. That was 1972. Here it is 2016, and I'm still saved, and I'm still following God, and I still never have taken a drink, still never have swore a cuss word, still have never done many of the things that I did before I got saved. And God is still on the throne. 34. The Pharisees had been defeated by a poor beggar, and so they cast him out of the synagogue. They cast the beggar out too. Hey, there was many in the church. The first church that I went to, there were many in there would have bet money against me like on a horse race and would have cast me out of the church. Were they able to do that? But the preacher was gracious. He accepted me for what I was and what I had become. And Christ found the outcast and began to meet him his spiritual needs. Does thou believest on the Son of God? And the man is ready to believe, but needs some direction. Christ reveals to him. The man responds in faith and worships Christ. Observing the man's humble response, Christ declares that he came to judge those who do not see, but who want to see. And the blind man will see. Those who think they see, the Pharisees, will be made blind. He made the blind man see and the Pharisees blind. Hey, that is good, ain't it? Let's read 39 and 41. And Jesus said, For judgment I am come unto this world, that they which see not might see, and they which see might be made blind. And some of the Pharisees which were with him heard these words, and said unto him, Are we blind also? And Jesus said unto them, If ye were blind, ye would have no sin. But now ye say, We see, therefore your sin remaineth. Wow. They were the sinners of the world. And the Pharisees are always the sinners. And every single work, every church, every work there is, you're going to have Pharisees. And you're going to have Pharisees in that work. And those Pharisees are going to believe they are, quote, quote, the righteous ones. They're going to believe they're the ones that do the will of God. They're going to believe it's by their might and not the might of God. Where God is the one that does it. God's the one that does it. Hey, I'm a man with minute worldly education, but have all of the years since 72 to now in Bible education. And the Lord's blessed me, allowed me to be in Titus Baptist Seminary out of faith.com, LaGrange.org, and LaGrange, Georgia. And it's a seminary, Titus Baptist Seminary. And I'm in it. I've got 2 years behind me. We were in school last night. We go every Thursday night, 2 hours. We're in school last night. We're doing the part of American history where the Esquanto, where the Christians were, and they were taught, believe it or not, they were taught by an Indian missionary who got saved, was transferred to England, has been around the world, and come back and explained to these people how Jesus was going to give the United States of America this land as God's land and be a free people, free from tyranny, free from a king, free from the Spaniard rule, free from the monarchies of other countries, of England, of other places, and it was going to be ruled by God and through the Bible, through God's Word, the Bible, and has been up until now. We're in danger right now of falling into a deep, dark pit to where even our clergymen, our Christian people, our men like myself will be put in prison. Men like myself will be rejected 100% by the foes of the devil. And they will be the ones with the power to be able to throw us into prison or even kill us. And say that the devil is going to rule this United States, not the Lord. And we're definitely headed that way. Wow. Well, that's the end of chapter 9, excuse me. That's the end of chapter 9. And we're going to go into another excerpt, chapter 10. We're going to close this one out at 23 minutes and go into another chapter. It's been good to be with you, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.